My daughter-in-law asked for 4 hours. Then she vanished for 5 years. She left her 2 young sons on my doorstep and never looked back. Now she's standing in a courtroom crying crocodile tears, accusing me of kidnapping the very children she threw away. Her lawyers think they have a winning case built on lies. But what they don't know is that my son, her dead husband, saw this coming before he died. And he left me one last thing: a small brown envelope. When I handed it to the judge, he looked at its contents, then looked at me and asked a single question. Do they know? I told him the truth. Not yet. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe that the truth always finds a way. It started with the sound of tires screaming against the asphalt of my quiet suburban street. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters when the screech of rubber made me look up. It was Jenna's sedan pulled halfway onto my lawn, as if the curb itself was a suggestion she had no time for. Before the engine was even off, she was out of the driver's side, pulling open the rear door with a frantic energy that set my teeth on edge. She hauled out my 2 grandsons, Leo, who was 7, and Caleb, only 5. They were still buckled into their booster seats, blinking in the harsh afternoon light, their hair rumpled from sleep. She marched them up the walkway, a woman on a mission. "David, thank God you're home," she said, her voice a strained whisper. She was dressed for an office in a blazer that was a size too tight and heels that were sinking into my lawn. "I am so sorry to do this, but I have a miracle interview. A once-in-a-lifetime chance. I just need you to watch them for a few hours. 4 hours tops. I'll be back before dinner, I swear." I stood there, holding a damp dishcloth, my mind struggling to catch up. The boys looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Leo, always the more serious one, was clutching the strap of his small backpack like a lifeline. Caleb was hiding behind his older brother's legs, a familiar position for him whenever Jenna's chaotic energy filled a room. "Jenna, slow down," I said, my voice calm, a deliberate counterpoint to her panic. "What's this all about? An interview for what?" It's a corporate management position," she stammered, avoiding my gaze. "It's perfect. The pay is incredible. It would change everything for me and the boys. But it's in the city, and it's right now. The babysitter canceled last minute, a total nightmare." I looked from her flushed face to the pale, anxious faces of my grandsons. Something felt wrong. It was a feeling I'd gotten used to over the years, a low hum of distrust, whenever Jenna presented a story that was just a little too perfect, a little too dramatic. "Michael wouldn't have liked this, Jenna," I said softly. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the memory of my son. It had been 2 years since the accident. 2 years since his steady presence had been erased from our lives, leaving behind a void that Jenna seemed determined to fill with chaos. Her face hardened for a split second, a flicker of annoyance before the mask of desperation snapped back into place. "Michael would have wanted me to take this chance," she retorted, her voice sharp. "He would want what's best for his sons." She pushed a grocery bag into my hands. It was filled with cheap snacks, a bag of chips, some cookies, and 2 juice boxes. "They've eaten lunch. This should hold them over. I have to go, I'm already late." She crouched down, giving each boy a quick theatrical kiss on the top of their heads. It was a gesture that looked more like a performance for my benefit than a genuine act of affection. "Be good for Grandpa," she chirped. "Mommy will be back soon." And with that, she turned and practically ran back to her car. She didn't look back. The car door slammed, the engine roared to life, and she sped away, leaving a patch of torn-up grass where her tires had been. I stood on the porch, the flimsy plastic bag in my hand, and watched until her car disappeared around the corner. The silence she left behind was deafening. I looked down at Leo and Caleb, 2 small boys who had just watched their mother vanish in a cloud of dust and excuses. "Well, I said, forcing a warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. How about we see if Grandpa still remembers how to make grilled cheese sandwiches? Leo just nodded, his eyes still fixed on the empty street. Caleb finally peeked out from behind him and whispered, "The crunchy kind." I managed a small smile. The crunchiest. The old grandfather clock in the hall, my wife Clara's favorite, began to feel less like a timepiece and more like a judge. Each heavy tick marked another minute of Jenna's absence. 4 o'clock came and went. Then 5. At 5:30, with the sun beginning to cast long shadows across the living room floor, I started calling her phone. The first call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Jenna. Leave a message." The cheerfulness in her recorded voice felt like a mockery. I left a simple message. "Jenna, it's David. It's past 5. Call me." I tried to keep things normal for the boys. We built a sprawling city out of Michael's old Lego bricks on the living room rug. I saw my son in the way Leo meticulously sorted the colors and in the way Caleb hummed to himself as he clicked the pieces together. For a moment, the anxiety subsided, replaced by a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. These boys were all I had left of him. At 6:30, I made dinner. Macaroni and cheese from a box and green beans from a can. It wasn't my usual fare, but it was what the boys wanted. They ate quietly at the large dining table where my own son had once done his homework. After dinner, I called Jenna again. Voicemail. This time, I didn't leave a message. A cold knot was forming in the pit of my stomach. As I was clearing the dishes, Caleb started to cry. It began as a soft whimper and grew into a full-blown sob. "I want my mommy," he wailed, his small body trembling. I knelt beside him, my heart aching. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his tears soak into my shirt. "It's okay, buddy. It's okay." Leo stood by the doorway watching us with an expression that was far too old for a 7-year-old. "Mommy leaves a lot," he said, his voice flat, matter-of-fact. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. This wasn't a one-time emergency. This was a pattern of abandonment that these small boys had already learned to expect. I looked at Leo, at the stoic resignation in his eyes, and my anxiety began to curdle into a slow, burning anger. I tucked both boys into the bed in Michael's old room. I left the hallway light on, and the door cracked open just as I used to do for him. I sat in the living room in the dark, the Lego city a chaotic silhouette on the floor. I watched the clock. 8 o'clock, 9, 10. Each hour felt like a betrayal. The 4-hour promise had been a lie, a tool to get what she wanted to escape her responsibility. The question was no longer when she was coming back. The question, the one that echoed in the silent house, was if she was coming back at all. I looked at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the 911. What would I even say? "My daughter-in-law is late." It sounded so trivial, yet I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was anything but. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair, watching the slivers of moonlight move across the floor, listening to the quiet breathing of my grandsons from down the hall. Every creak of the old house, every passing car sent a jolt of false hope through me, but the driveway remained empty. The phone remained silent. Sometime before dawn, I must have drifted off, because I was startled awake by the buzz of my phone on the end table. My heart leaped. I grabbed it, my hands clumsy with a mixture of hope and dread. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. There were only 9 words on the screen. "They're better off with you. Don't look for me." I read the message once, twice, a third time. The words didn't change. They were simple, concise, and utterly devastating. There was no apology, no explanation, just a cold, clean severing of ties. It was the final brutal confirmation of what I had suspected all night. She wasn't coming back. This wasn't a temporary crisis. It was a permanent abdication. A wave of fury washed over me so intense it made my vision blur. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to find her and force her to look into the eyes of the children she had just discarded like an old piece of furniture. But then I looked down the hallway towards the room where Leo and Caleb were sleeping. I could hear Caleb murmuring in his sleep. I thought of their faces so full of trust and vulnerability. My anger didn't vanish, but it shifted. It cooled, hardened, and transformed into something else. Resolve. I looked back at the screen at the 9 words that had just detonated our lives. She had drawn her line in the sand. She had walked away and closed the door behind her. So I would draw my own line. I would build my own door. My thumb moved over the screen. It hovered for a moment over the message that was both a confession and a curse. Then I pressed delete. A small pop-up asked if I was sure. I was. Then I went to my contacts, found the unknown number, and pressed block. It was a quiet act of defiance in the dim light of dawn. I would not search for a ghost. I would not beg for a mother who didn't want her own children. I would build a fortress for the 2 small boys sleeping down the hall, a place of safety and stability and love, and I would make it impenetrable. The war had been declared not with a shout, but with a silent, digital click. And in the stillness of my home, I accepted the terms. The fight for my grandsons had begun. My old life, the one measured in stock market tickers and quarterly reports, was over. The new one was measured in smaller, more chaotic units. The frantic morning rush to find a matching pair of socks, the precise temperature for a grilled cheese sandwich, the number of monster-free checks under Caleb's bed before he could fall asleep. I was a retired investment analyst, a man who had navigated the complex world of finance with logic and precision. Now I was navigating a world of scraped knees, parent-teacher conferences, and the bottomless grief of 2 little boys. The days became a blur of routine. Wake up, make breakfast, pack lunches, school drop-off. Then a few hours of quiet where I'd do laundry, grocery shop, and try to bring order to the chaos. Then school pickup, homework, dinner, bath time, and finally the fragile peace of bedtime. It was relentless. It was exhausting. And it was the most important work I had ever done. The nights were the hardest. That's when the ghosts came out. Caleb's nightmares were a frequent terror. He would wake up screaming. His small body drenched in sweat, convinced a shadow in the corner was his mother coming to take him away to a dark place. I would hold him for hours, humming the same lullabies my wife Clara used to sing to Michael, until his sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. Leo's pain was quieter, sharper. He was old enough to understand the shape of what had happened, even if he couldn't grasp the reasons. He would ambush me with questions that felt like tiny, precise daggers to the heart. "Grandpa, why did Mommy leave us?" he asked one evening while we were washing dishes. "Was it because we were bad?" I stopped scrubbing the pan and knelt down to his level, forcing myself to meet his searching gaze. "No, Leo. Never," I said, my voice thick. "This was not your fault, not for 1 second. This was about your mom's problems. Big grown-up problems that have nothing to do with you or Caleb." He seemed to accept it, but I could see the question still lingering in his eyes, a shadow that would take years to fade. It was during those first few months that I realized I couldn't just survive this. I had to manage it. My old instincts kicked in. If I could manage a multi-million-dollar portfolio, I could manage this. I went to my study, a room that had been dormant since my retirement, and I opened my laptop. I created a new spreadsheet. I named it The Boys. It was meticulous. Every single expense was logged. Column A, date. Column B, item. Column C, cost. New shoes for Leo, $512. Doctor's visit for Caleb's ear infection, $150 copay. School supplies, groceries, haircuts, birthday presents for their friends. Every penny was accounted for. It wasn't about the money. It was about creating a record, a ledger of care, a testament to the fact that these boys were not a burden. They were an investment. My only investment. Next to the laptop, I placed a simple leather-bound journal. This was for the data that couldn't be quantified in dollars and cents. I wrote down the milestones: the day Caleb finally learned to tie his own shoes, the A Leo got on his science project. I also wrote down the hard things. Leo's exact words when he asked about his mother. The details of Caleb's nightmares. I wrote down every time they cried for her, and every time they laughed with me. It felt cold, clinical at first, but I knew it was necessary. I was building a case brick by brick, though I didn't yet know who the jury would be. I was documenting a life, the life we were building together from the rubble Jenna had left behind. One rainy Saturday, while looking for an old board game in the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty cardboard box labeled Michael, College. My heart seized for a moment. I hadn't been able to bring myself to go through his things since he passed. Taking a deep breath, I sliced through the old packing tape. Inside was a time capsule of my son's young adulthood. Old textbooks, a faded university sweatshirt, concert ticket stubs, and underneath it all a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were the letters he had written to me during his freshman year. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and unfolded the first one. His familiar, slightly slanted handwriting filled the page. He wrote about his classes, his difficult roommate, his homesickness, but mostly, he wrote about us. Dad. One letter read, "I was telling some guys about how you taught me to change the oil in the old truck. They were all amazed. They said their dads never showed them stuff like that. It made me realize how lucky I am." Another one from a few months later was more vulnerable. "I bombed my calculus midterm. I felt like such a failure. I almost didn't call you because I didn't want to disappoint you. But then I remembered what you always said. It's not about falling down, it's about how you get back up. So I'm going to office hours every day this week. I'm going to beat this thing." I sat there on the dusty attic floor for hours reading each letter, the faint scent of old paper filling the air. I was transported back in time to a period when the bond between us was simple, strong, and uncluttered. It was before Jenna. Before the arguments about money, before the subtle ways she would isolate him from me, framing my advice as criticism and my concern as control. These letters were a painful reminder of the son I had raised, and the man he had become, a good, decent man who had loved his family fiercely. They were also proof of a relationship built on trust and mutual respect. I carefully placed the letters back in the box, but not before taking out a few of them. I tucked them into the back pocket of my leather-bound journal, alongside the receipts and the recorded heartaches. They were another brick in the fortress I was building, a reminder of the foundation on which this new life stood, a foundation of a father's love passed down to his son, and now to his son's sons. A year passed, 12 months, 365 days of building a new life on the foundations of a broken promise. We found a rhythm, the three of us, a fragile peace settled into the corners of our home. We marked the passage of time with small celebrations. Caleb turned 6, and we had a small party with a superhero cake and 3 of his friends from kindergarten. Leo lost his 2 front teeth and learned to ride his bike without training wheels. We were a family. Not the one I had imagined, but a family nonetheless. The ghost of Jenna still lingered, of course. She was in the questions the boys no longer asked, in the way they flinched whenever a car that looked like hers drove down our street. The trigger that finally sent me to a lawyer's office was a simple piece of paper. It was a permission slip for Leo's first field trip. At the bottom were 2 lines for signatures: father guardian and mother guardian. I signed my name on the first line. The second line remained starkly, accusingly blank. I stared at it for a long time. That empty line felt like a legal vulnerability, a doorway I had left unlocked. Jenna was gone, but she wasn't a ghost. In the eyes of the law, she was a mother. A ghost with rights. The next day, I made an appointment with a family law attorney my financial planner had recommended. Her name was Avery Hayes. Her office was in a modern glass building downtown, a world away from my quiet, tree-lined street. The space was minimalist and immaculate, decorated in shades of gray and white. There were no family photos on her desk, only a sleek laptop and a single intimidatingly sharp-looking pen. Ms. Hayes herself was just like her office. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a handshake that was firm and brief. She didn't waste time with small talk. She gestured for me to sit and said, "Mr. Pearson, your planner said it was an urgent family matter. Please tell me everything." So I did. I spoke calmly, laying out the facts as I had recorded them in my journal. The frantic drop-off, the 4-hour promise, the final cruel text message, the year of absolute silence that followed. I told her about the boys, about their nightmares and their questions, and about the stable, loving home I was trying to provide. I had brought my spreadsheet and my journal with me, and I placed them on her polished desk. She listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving my face. She didn't offer sympathy or comforting words. She just absorbed the information, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, tapping her sharp pen on a legal pad. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was as crisp and direct as her appearance. "Mr. Pearson, I'm going to tell you the inconvenient truth. What you have done for your grandsons is admirable. Morally, you are in the right. Legally, you are in a gray area the size of this state." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "In the eyes of the court, Jenna is their mother. Her parental rights don't just vanish because she behaved irresponsibly. To a judge, a year of silence can be spun into a story of a grieving widow who suffered a mental breakdown. Her lawyer will call it a period of instability, not abandonment. Abandonment is a very high legal bar to clear." The air in the room suddenly felt thin. "So what you're saying," I said slowly, "is that she could just show up tomorrow, knock on my door, and demand to take them back." "It wouldn't be that simple, but yes, that is the core of your problem," Ms. Hayes said. "She could file for custody, and it would become a battle. A long, expensive, and emotionally devastating battle for you and for those boys. She would paint you as the controlling father-in-law who took advantage of her grief to steal her children, and a judge might just listen." I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. The fortress I thought I had been building suddenly felt like a house of cards. Ms. Hayes must have seen the look on my face because her tone softened just slightly. It wasn't sympathy, but strategy. She gestured towards the spreadsheet and the journal on her desk. "This," she said, tapping the leather cover of my journal, "is your only weapon. What you've been doing instinctively is exactly what you need to be doing legally." She stood up and began to pace behind her desk, a general planning her campaign. "The law doesn't care about what's fair, Mr. Pearson. It cares about what's documented. So here is my advice to you. You are going to continue to do exactly what you are doing, but with purpose. Every receipt for groceries, every doctor's bill, every pair of shoes you keep. That spreadsheet is your financial proof of sole support. That journal," she paused and pointed at it, "is even more important. Every nightmare Caleb has, you write it down. Every sad question Leo asks you, write it down. Every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every holiday she misses you, write it down. You are no longer just a grandfather. You are the primary custodian, and you are creating a record of that fact." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression deadly serious. "You must transform your life into an irrefutable file, a body of evidence so detailed, so overwhelming, that if she ever does come back, no lawyer, no judge can deny the truth. You were the one who was there. You were the one who provided, protected, and parented. Every receipt is a brick in your wall, Mr. Pearson. Every journal entry is another layer of mortar. You're not just raising boys. You are building a fortress of facts. I left her office an hour later, the $1,000 retainer fee feeling like the best investment I had ever made. I wasn't scared anymore. I was armed. Ms. Hayes had given my instincts a name and a legal purpose. My meticulous nature, which Jenna had always mocked as controlling, was now my greatest asset. I walked out of that glass tower and back into the sunlight, my resolve hardened into steel. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it hadn't even begun. But now I knew how to win. Another 2 years slipped by, quiet and steady like a slow-moving river. The boys were growing. Caleb, now 8, had finally conquered his nightmares. Leo, on the cusp of 10, was becoming a voracious reader, his quiet nature now filled with the worlds he discovered in books. Our life had a rhythm, a comforting predictability built on school schedules, weekend trips to the park, and the shared ritual of our Sunday pancake breakfasts. We were stable. We were happy. But the blank space Jenna had left in our lives was a strategic vulnerability, a flank left exposed. And as a man who had spent his career analyzing risk, I knew that an unknown variable was the most dangerous one of all. The decision to hire a private investigator was not born from emotion. It was a calculated act of risk management. I wasn't interested in bringing Jenna back. That ship had sailed and sunk long ago. I simply needed data. I needed to know where the potential threat was, what form it might take, and when it might appear on the horizon. To protect my grandsons, I had to know their enemy, and she was their enemy, of that I had no doubt. I found a man named Mr. Stone. He was a former police detective with a small, discreet office 2 towns over. He was a quiet man with tired eyes who seemed to absorb information without judgment. I sat in his office, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun, and laid out the facts just as I had for Ms. Hayes. I gave him Jenna's full name, her date of birth, and the last known photo I had of her. "I need to be very clear, Mr. Stone," I said, my voice even. "I am not looking for a reunion. I am not paying you to bring her back. I am paying you for information. I want to know where she is, what she is doing, and what name she is using. I want to know if she poses a future threat to my grandsons. Consider it a threat assessment." Mr. Stone simply nodded, writing in a small notebook. "I understand, Mr. Pearson. Discretion is paramount. You want a file, a clear picture of the current situation. I'll be in touch." 3 weeks later, a thick manila envelope arrived at my post office box. There was no return address, just my name typed on the label. I took it home and waited until the boys were asleep before I sat down in my study and turned on the desk lamp. The house was silent except for the familiar tick of the grandfather clock. I slid open the envelope. Inside was a professionally bound report, its pages cool and clinical, and photographs, high-resolution color photographs. My hands were perfectly still as I looked at the first one. It was Jenna. But it was a version of her I had never seen before. She was on the deck of a large sailboat, laughing, her head thrown back in carefree joy. Her hair was blonder, her body leaner. She was holding a champagne flute, and her other arm was linked with a man's. He was older, with silvering hair and the easy, confident smile of someone who had never had to worry about money. The sun was sparkling on the turquoise water behind them. It was a perfect picture of a perfect life. A life without children. I turned the page. The next section of the report detailed her new identity. She was no longer Jenna Pearson. She was now Jennifer Croft. She was living in a waterfront condo in Florida. The man in the picture was a real estate developer named Julian Croft. They weren't married, but their social media presence, which Mr. Stone had meticulously documented, painted them as a power couple. Then came more photos printed from her public Instagram profile under her new name. There she was at a charity gala wearing a shimmering silver gown. The caption underneath read, "So blessed to be able to give back to those in need." The hypocrisy was so profound, it almost took my breath away. She was talking about helping needy strangers while her own sons were learning to live with the gaping wound she had left in their lives. Another photo showed her on a white sand beach, a tropical drink in her hand. Another at a lavish party surrounded by smiling, wealthy people. In every image, she was the star, radiant and unburdened. Mr. Stone's report noted that in over 2 years of online activity, she had never once mentioned that she was a mother. She had never posted a photo of Leo or Caleb. She hadn't just left them. She had erased them. She had amputated her own past to create a more convenient present. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt a profound and chilling coldness settle deep in my chest. It was the detached calm of an analyst looking at a set of data and seeing a clear, undeniable pattern. This wasn't a woman who had made a mistake. This was a woman who had executed a plan. She had liquidated her old life, children included, for an upgrade. My movements became slow and deliberate. I stood up and walked to my printer. I selected the 3 most damning photographs: Jenna on the yacht, Jenna at the gala, and the report page detailing her new name and address. I printed them on high-quality photo paper. The colors were vivid, almost beautiful. Then I opened the spreadsheet on my computer, the one titled The Boys. I scrolled to the bottom, where a formula automatically calculated the grand total of every expense for the last 3 years. The number was substantial. I created a simple summary page with just the total cost displayed in a large, bold font, and printed that as well. I walked over to the bookshelf and retrieved a simple, sturdy brown manila envelope. I slid the glossy photographs inside first. Then, I slid the financial summary in on top of them. A statement of her new life and a bill for her old one. With the envelope in my hand, I went to the closet in my study. Behind a row of old winter coats was the heavy steel door of my home safe. I knelt down, the rough texture of the carpet pressing into my knees. My fingers, steady and sure, turned the combination lock. Click, click, click. The heavy bolt disengaged with a satisfying thud. I pulled the door open. Inside, among the property deeds and my late wife's jewelry, was an empty space. I placed the brown envelope squarely in the middle of it. It lay there unassuming but filled with a terrible weight. I looked at it for a long moment. It was my insurance policy. My weapon in a war I hoped I would never have to fight. Then I closed the heavy steel door. The bolt slid home with a sound of finality. The clicking of the lock echoed in the silent room. The evidence was secure. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. 5 years. It's a long time. It's long enough for a 5-year-old to become 10, for a 7-year-old to stand on the brink of his teens. It's long enough for a house to absorb the sounds of new laughter, for scraped knees to heal into faint white scars, and for the ghost of a person to fade into a distant, blurry memory. Our life, the one I had forged for Leo, Caleb, and myself, was no longer new. It was simply ours. It was solid, predictable, and safe. I had come to believe that the fortress I had built was strong enough to stand forever. I had forgotten that the most dangerous attacks often come on the quietest of days. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, the kind of day where the air is warm and smells of freshly cut grass. I was in the backyard with Caleb, helping him glue the final delicate wing onto a model airplane he'd been working on for weeks. His tongue was stuck out in concentration, his brow furrowed. Leo was on the porch swing, lost in a thick fantasy novel, his feet occasionally pushing off to keep a gentle rhythm. The scene was perfectly, beautifully ordinary. It was everything I had fought to create. And then the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, formal, cutting through the peaceful hum of the afternoon. It wasn't the cheerful chime of a neighbor or the quick ring of a delivery driver. I wiped the glue from my fingers on an old rag. "I'll be right back, guys," I said. Through the screen door, I could see a man I didn't recognize standing on my porch. He wore a nondescript polo shirt and held a thick, official-looking envelope. He was a man who blended into the background, whose only purpose was to be a messenger. David Pearson, he asked, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Yes, I replied, a flicker of unease stirring within me. You've been served, he said. He extended the envelope. It wasn't a request. It was a procedure. I took it from his hand. It felt heavy, weighted with more than just paper. He checked a box on a form attached to a clipboard, turned without another word, and walked back to his unremarkable sedan parked at the curb. I stood there for a moment, the screen door still closed between me and the world. The boys had stopped what they were doing. Caleb was looking at me with wide, curious eyes. Leo had put his book down, his expression wary, perceptive. They knew this was not ordinary. I stepped back inside, letting the screen door swing shut with a soft clap. My hands were steady as I tore open the seal. I pulled out a thick stack of papers, stapled together in the top corner. The first page was dense with legal text, but my eyes, trained to find key data in a sea of information, immediately locked onto the bolded words. Jenna Croft, plaintiff, versus David Pearson, defendant. My breath caught in my chest. Croft. She was using her new name. I scanned further down the page. My eyes snagged on words that seemed to leap off the paper, obscene and alien in the context of my life. Petition for custody. Damages sought for kidnapping. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. And then I saw the number. A number so audacious, so disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. $500,000. She wasn't just coming back for the children she had thrown away. She was coming back with a bill for my service. She was suing me for $500,000 for the crime of loving her sons. A strange calm descended over me. It was the same feeling I used to get when the stock market would suddenly plunge. In the midst of panic, my mind would become a quiet, cold, crystal-clear place. All the preparation, all the documentation, all the quiet years of waiting, it had all been leading to this single vulgar piece of paper in my hands. Grandpa? Who was that? It was Leo's voice pulling me back from the brink. I looked up from the lawsuit and saw their faces. Two boys, my boys, looking at their grandfather, their protector, searching his expression for reassurance. I saw the fear blooming in Leo's eyes and the confusion clouding Caleb's. In that instant, I knew that my own feelings did not matter. My rage, my sense of betrayal, all of it had to be locked away. They needed their fortress to stand. They needed me to be unbreakable. I carefully folded the papers and placed them on the kitchen counter. I walked over to them and knelt down, putting a hand on each of their shoulders. My face was a calm, neutral mask. "It's just some papers, boys," I said, my voice even and steady. "Some boring, grown-up stuff from a long time ago. Nothing you need to worry about at all." I looked at Caleb. "Now that wing on your plane isn't going to set itself, is it?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded, the immediate crisis of the model airplane overriding the vague threat of the man at the door. He scurried back to the patio table. I looked at Leo. He didn't look convinced. He knew more than he let on. He had seen the words on the page. "Really, Leo," I said, giving his shoulder a firm squeeze. "I've got this." He held my gaze for a long moment, then finally gave a small, reluctant nod and picked up his book, though I knew he wasn't really reading anymore. I stood up and watched them for a moment. My two precious boys, a sudden fierce wave of protectiveness washing over me. Jenna had fired the first shot. She had chosen the battlefield. She had written her story of lies and delusion. But she had made a critical miscalculation. She thought she was attacking a lonely old man. She didn't realize she was attacking a fortress. And she had no idea what was waiting for her inside my safe. I turned back to the papers on the counter, my eyes cold. The waiting was over. The game had begun. The drive to Ms. Hayes's office was a blur. The lawsuit papers sat on the passenger seat, a venomous presence in my quiet car. When I arrived, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. The documents were already spread across her large conference table, a landscape of lies printed in stark black ink. She had a second copy in her hands already filled with her own sharp, precise annotations in red pen. "I've read it twice, David," she said, her voice a low, serious hum. "It's a work of fiction, a masterpiece in its own twisted way." She pushed a copy across the polished wood towards me. "You need to read it. You need to understand the story she's telling." I sat down, the leather of the chair cool against my back. I picked up the document. It was an official affidavit, a sworn statement from Jenna. Her story. I began to read, and with each paragraph, the world I had painstakingly built for my grandsons seemed to tilt on its axis. She began with the death of my son. She painted herself as a woman utterly destroyed by grief. In the wake of my beloved husband, Michael's tragic passing, she wrote, "I was plunged into a fog of insurmountable grief. The world lost its color. I was adrift in an ocean of sorrow, unable to distinguish day from night. My only anchor was the love for my two beautiful boys, but my depression was a crippling weight, making it impossible for me to be the mother they deserved." I could feel my knuckles turning white as I gripped the papers. I thought of the life insurance check for $2 million she had cashed just days after his funeral. I thought of her adrift on a yacht in the Florida sun. Then she moved on to the day she left them on my doorstep. She twisted that act of cold abandonment into a desperate cry for help. In my darkest hour, I turned to the only family I had left, my late husband's father. I drove to his home, my precious sons asleep in the back, and I begged him for temporary help. I told him I needed a few hours a day at most to see a grief counselor he had recommended. I believed he would be a safe harbor in my storm. My mind flashed back to her frantic made-up story about a job interview. There had been no mention of a counselor. It was a lie, layered on top of another lie. Instead, her statement continued, he saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. He took my children into his home, and then he closed the door on me. Every phone call I made went unanswered. Every attempt to see my boys was blocked. He used my fragile emotional state to seize control, severing my connection to my own flesh and blood under the guise of protecting them. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. She had reinvented herself as the victim and me as the villain, a calculating old man who had stolen her children in her moment of weakness. The final section was dedicated to her miraculous 5-year recovery. "I have spent the last 5 years fighting my way back to the light," she wrote. "It has been a long and arduous journey of intensive therapy, of working multiple jobs to save money for a stable home, of rebuilding myself piece by piece from the ashes of my grief. Every single day, my motivation has been the thought of being reunited with my sons. Every action I have taken has been to become the strong, healthy mother they need and deserve. Now finally, that day has come." I put the papers down on the table, my hands trembling with a cold, silent rage. I looked at Ms. Hayes. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. "This is good," she said softly. It was a chilling assessment. "From a legal strategy standpoint, this is very, very good." She stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city. "Forget the truth for a moment, David. Look at the story they are selling. The grieving mother versus the controlling patriarch. A young widow shattered by loss and an old man who swoops in and takes everything she has left. It's a powerful narrative." "It's a lie," I said, my voice hoarse. "Every word of it is a lie. I have the proof, the text message, the private investigator's report, the photos of her arduous journey on a yacht." "I know," she said, turning back to face me, "and we will present that proof. But you need to prepare yourself. Family court judges are human. They operate on emotion as much as on fact. This story," she tapped the affidavit with her pen, "it pulls at the heartstrings. Her lawyer is smart. He will have her on the stand, dressed modestly, crying, as she recounts this fairy tale, and the judge will see a mother desperate to get her children back. She walked back to the table and sat down, leaning forward, her gaze intense. They are not just suing for custody, David. They are suing for $500,000. That number isn't random. It's designed to make you look greedy. They will argue that you didn't just take her kids. You hoarded the family resources. You lived comfortably while she, the poor widow, was working multiple jobs to survive. The pressure in the room felt immense, suffocating. It wasn't just Jenna I was fighting anymore. It was the story she had crafted. A story that was simpler, more dramatic, and perhaps more believable than the quiet, complicated truth of our lives. I looked down at my own hands. Hands that had bandaged scraped knees, packed thousands of lunches, and held my grandsons tight during nightmares. And for the first time I felt a sliver of doubt. I had a fortress of facts. But she had a battering ram of emotion. I had to pray that my walls were strong enough. The legal documents were a poison seeping silently into the foundations of our home. I had thought my fortress was strong, but I had built it to withstand an outside attack, not a sickness from within. The lawsuit wasn't just a stack of papers on my desk. It was a ghost that now sat at our dinner table, that tucked the boys into bed at night, that whispered doubts into their dreams. The first cracks began to show in the quietest of places. It started with Caleb. One morning I went into his room to wake him for school and was met with the faint, unmistakable smell of urine. The sheets were damp. He was huddled on the far edge of the bed, his face a mask of shame. He was 10 years old and hadn't had an accident like this in years. I didn't say a word about it. I just quietly stripped the bed, told him to hop in the shower, and put the soiled linens in the wash, just as I had when he was a toddler. But the next morning it happened again, and again the day after. The stress of the looming battle was unearthing old anxieties, pulling him back into the fears of the little 5-year-old boy his mother had left behind. Leo's cracks were sharper, more jagged. He retreated into a fortress of his own, a silent, brooding place where I couldn't reach him. His grades, once a source of pride, began to slip. Then came the call from his school principal. Leo had gotten into a fight during recess. He had pushed a boy who had made a careless comment about kids who don't have a mom. When I tried to talk to him about it, he just stared at the floor, his jaw set. He was being stupid, was all he would say. My outgoing, thoughtful grandson was being replaced by a stranger, an angry, withdrawn boy who saw the world as a threat. Then came the official scrutiny. A woman from Child Protective Services, a Ms. Albright, scheduled a home visit. She was polite, professional, her eyes missing nothing. Our home, once a sanctuary of comfortable, lived-in clutter, was suddenly under a microscope. I watched as she interviewed the boys, her questions gentle but probing. "How do you feel living with your grandpa? Do you miss your mom?" I saw Caleb shrink into himself. I saw Leo's hands clench into fists at his sides. We were being judged, our little family's happiness weighed and measured by a stranger with a clipboard. The walls of my fortress were beginning to feel like they were made of glass. The next blow came a week later, delivered over the phone by Ms. Hayes. Her voice was clipped, all business. "David, I have an update. Jenna's lawyer has filed a motion for a supervised visit with the boys. The judge granted it. It's happening this Saturday." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Do we have to?" I asked, knowing the answer. "We have to comply, David," she said, her voice firm. "Refusing would make you look obstructive. It would play right into their narrative that you're the one keeping them apart. It will be at a neutral location, a family visitation center. A social worker will be present the entire time. She won't be allowed to be alone with them." The reassurances felt hollow. This wasn't about a mother's right to see her sons. This was a strategic move in a brutal game, a Trojan horse being wheeled up to my gates. That night I had to tell them. I sat them both down on the living room couch, the same couch where they had slept that first terrible night 5 years ago. I kept my voice as calm and steady as I could. Boys, I began, your mother has asked to see you. A judge has said that it's okay. It will be for a short time this Saturday. Caleb's face crumpled, and he immediately scrambled into my lap, burying his face in my chest. I don't want to go, he mumbled, his voice thick with tears. Leo just stared at me, his expression cold and hard. Why? He asked, the single word filled with accusation. After all this time, why now? I don't know the answer to that, Leo, I said honestly, stroking Caleb's hair. But what I do know is that you are both strong, and I will be right there in the next room. I'm not going anywhere. Leo said nothing. He just stood up and walked to his room, closing the door softly behind him. The silence he left was heavier than any argument. I held Caleb, feeling his small body shake with silent sobs. The cracks were widening, threatening to shatter everything I had built. Jenna wasn't just suing me for money or custody. She was actively dismantling the peace and security of my grandsons, piece by painful piece. She wasn't coming to see her sons. She was coming to scout the battlefield. And I had to prepare my boys for a war they should never have had to fight. The courtroom was a theater of manufactured grief. Every detail had been perfectly staged. Jenna sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a modest gray dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple, unadorned style. She looked like a woman who had forgotten the meaning of vanity, a mother consumed by a single noble purpose. A tissue was clutched in her hand, and every few minutes she would raise it to her eyes, dabbing at tears that never seemed to fall. Her performance was flawless. Her lawyer was in the middle of his closing argument, his voice ringing with passionate indignation. He paced before the judge, a portrait of righteous anger. For 5 long years, he boomed, pointing a dramatic finger in my direction. This man, David Pearson, has played the part of the benevolent grandfather. But what is the truth? The truth is that he exploited a grieving widow at her absolute lowest point. He used her depression as a weapon, isolating her from her own children, building a wall of silence and control around them. And now he stands before you, asking you to reward this monstrous act of kidnapping. We are asking for justice. We are asking for this mother to be reunited with the sons who were stolen from her. He sat down. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Everything he said, every lie he spun, fit perfectly into the narrative they had constructed. The judge, a man with a tired but discerning face, looked over the top of his spectacles at me. My own lawyer, Ms. Hayes, gave my arm a slight reassuring squeeze under the table. All eyes were on me. The room was waiting for my defense, for my emotional plea. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling steady, my heart a calm, rhythmic beat in my chest. I did not look at Jenna. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I said, my voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet room. I could sit here and tell you my side of the story. I could tell you about the last 5 years, but I believe there is a witness who knew Jenna better than anyone in this room. Someone who understood her character completely. My son, Michael. A confused murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jenna's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. The man's son is deceased. I am aware of that, the judge said, his eyes now fixed on me with a new intensity. Mr. Pearson, where are you going with this? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the old, familiar brown manila envelope. I walked forward and placed it gently on the witness stand. The soft sound of paper on wood seemed to echo in the silence. 5 years ago, Your Honor, I put this away, I said. Today, with the court's permission, I'd like to open it. The judge stared at the envelope for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Proceed. My fingers didn't tremble as I opened the clasp. The first document I pulled out was a single crisp sheet of paper. The first exhibit is my son's last will and testament, notarized 1 month before his fatal accident. I handed it to the court clerk, who passed it up to the judge. I watched the judge's face as he read. His eyebrows rose slightly. He adjusted his glasses, reading a specific passage a second time. He looked over at Jenna, whose perfect composure was beginning to show the faintest of cracks, then back at me. "For the record," the judge said, his voice now laced with steel, "this document contains a clause that reads, 'In the event of my death, I hereby appoint my father, David Pearson, as the sole legal guardian of my children, Leo and Caleb Pearson. This decision has been made after thorough consideration of the mental and emotional stability of my wife, Jenna." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jenna's lawyer was now pale, his confidence visibly evaporating. Jenna stared at the judge, her mouth slightly agape. "That's not all, Your Honor," I said, reaching back into the envelope. "The second exhibit is the policy document for Michael's life insurance, a policy for $2 million. I placed it before the clerk. "And the third exhibit is a bank statement showing the full $2 million payout being deposited into Jenna's private account 3 days after my son's funeral. Not a single dollar was ever placed in a trust for the children." The judge reviewed the documents. The cold, hard numbers on the page told a story that directly contradicted Jenna's tale of a poor, struggling widow. Her lawyer was now leaning over, whispering furiously in her ear. Her fiancé, the wealthy developer who was sitting in the gallery, had a look of profound confusion and dawning horror on his face. "And finally, Your Honor," I said, my voice dropping, "my son left one last thing." I pulled out a small silver USB drive. He was a methodical man. He knew he needed to protect his boys even if he wasn't there to do it himself. The clerk took the USB drive. There was a large monitor in the courtroom for presenting evidence. After a moment of fumbling, the screen flickered to life. It was Michael. He was sitting in his car, the camera on his phone recording his own face. He looked exhausted, his eyes heavy with a sadness that pierced me to the core. He looked straight into the camera, as if he was looking right at me. "Dad," he began, his voice strained, "if you're watching this, it means the worst has happened." He took a shaky breath. "You know I love Jenna, but I can't ignore it anymore. She told me—" His voice broke and he had to stop, a tear rolling down his cheek. "She told me that Leo and Caleb were the biggest mistake of her life. She said she feels trapped." The video ended. A collective gasp went through the room. Jenna was ashen, staring at the screen in disbelief. "There is one more file, Your Honor," I said. The clerk clicked it. This time there was no video, only audio, and Jenna's voice, cold, clear, and filled with a venom I knew all too well, filled the silent courtroom. It was a secret recording. "I'm telling you, Michael," her voice sneered. "Once you're gone, I'll be free. I am not spending the rest of my life changing diapers and going to parent-teacher conferences. They are your burden, not mine." The audio file ended. Dead silence. It was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The ugly, undeniable truth hung in the air, poisoning the entire room. Jenna's carefully constructed narrative, her entire identity as a grieving victim, had not just been questioned, it had been obliterated. She sat there exposed and ruined, her crocodile tears finally replaced by the real hot tears of utter and complete self-destruction. The performance was over. The truth had taken the stage. The sound of Jenna's own voice faded, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more damning than any accusation. The air in the courtroom was thick, unmoving. Jenna sat frozen, her face a ghastly shade of white. The carefully constructed mask of the victim shattered into a million pieces. She stared at the blank monitor as if it might offer an escape, but it only reflected her own ruin. From the gallery behind her, there was a quiet sound, the scrape of a chair against the polished floor. Her wealthy fiancé, Julian Croft, stood up. He didn't look at her. He simply adjusted his expensive suit jacket, turned, and walked down the central aisle with quiet, deliberate steps. The soft click of the courtroom door closing behind him was the sound of her entire fabricated life imploding. The play was over. The judge's gaze was like granite. He looked at Jenna, then at her lawyer, who seemed to have shrunk into his chair. Then his eyes settled on me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something that looked like respect. The gavel struck the wood, the sound like a crack of thunder in the silent room. "This case is dismissed with prejudice," he declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Sole legal and physical custody of the minors Leo and Caleb Pearson is hereby granted to their grandfather, Mr. David Pearson, effective immediately." He wasn't finished. "Furthermore, this court will recommend the district attorney's office open an investigation into the plaintiff for perjury and potential insurance fraud." I didn't look at Jenna. I didn't need to see her defeat. My victory was not in her face. It was at the back of the room. I turned and saw my boys sitting with the social worker, their faces pale and uncertain. I walked towards them, each step feeling lighter than the last. The battle was over. I knelt before them, bringing myself down to their level. I looked into their eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw the fear begin to recede, replaced by a dawning sense of relief. I pulled them into my arms, holding them tight against my chest, feeling their small bodies relax into mine. "It's over," I whispered into their hair, my voice thick with emotion. "It's all over. Let's go home." And we did. We walked out of that courtroom, the three of us, my hand holding Leo's, his other hand holding Caleb's, a small, unbreakable chain. We pushed through the heavy courthouse doors and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the shadows and the lies behind us for good. This journey taught me a difficult but crucial lesson. The loudest story isn't always the truest. While deception spins compelling tales of victimhood, the truth is often built quietly through years of consistent, documented action. My strength wasn't in arguing, but in the patient work of building an undeniable record of care. I learned that true protection for your family isn't just about love. It's about the foresight to turn that love into a fortress of facts ready for the day it's needed most. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one holding the most powerful truth. If you believe the greatest victories are won through quiet preparation rather than loud arguments, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.